Hey everyone! In today's video we will be exploring a series of fascinating yet tragic historical tales. From dark secrets to eerie mysteries, these heartbreaking stories were shaped by injustice, sickness, and cruel twists of fate. So, join me as we explore all of this and much more. For our first story we are going to New Jersey, USA, at the turn of the 20th century. Grace Fryer was born on the 14th of March, 1899 in Orange, New Jersey. Her father, Daniel Edward Fryer, worked as a union rep, and her mother was Grace Morton Gilbert. Her family was very large as she had 10 siblings, yet information on her childhood is scarce, but a newspaper article on her stated that she has not been pampered, nor she has been taught to think first of her own happiness. On the 4th of April 1917, the United States joined the First World War. 2 of her brothers were sent off to fight, and in light of this, Grace wanted to help her family and the war effort as much as she could. Just 4 days later, she managed to find work as a dial painter at the United States Radium Corporation in her hometown in Orange, New Jersey. It was around this time that the US Radium Corporation mass-produced Undark, a high-tech glow-in-the-dark paint invented in 1902 by William J. Hammer. This became widely used among foot soldiers, as they could now read their military dials and wristwatches at night. Furthermore, the paint was also used in a number of household goods, such as light switches, house numbers, and doll eyes. Despite growing health concerns, US Radium stated that their paint was absolutely harmless in such minute quantities. This may have been true for those who bought their products, but the same couldn't be said for the workers who were exposed on end to radium. Unlike other companies at the time, US Radium were more than happy to have women in their workforce. In actual fact, their painting staff was composed almost entirely of teenage girls. Well, their steady hands were perfect for this line of work. Moreover, their wages were around triple that of a standard factory job, meaning these girls were among the highest paid female workers in the country. Because of this, it was described as the elite job for poor working girls. The good pay wasn't the only appealing factor of the job. Many young women worked in the studio alongside their friends and siblings. For a time, Grace worked with her little sister, Adelaide, yet she was very extroverted, and since she talked too much, she eventually got sacked. In the studio, they were required to delicately paint Undark onto the lines of tiny dials. This work required a lot of precision, so the workers, Grace included, followed the techniques that they had been taught. One of these techniques was called lip pointing. After a few strokes, a paintbrush tended to lose its shape, so women were encouraged to use their lips to keep the tips of a brush sharp and clean. The problem was that every time they put the brush between their lips, they swallowed a tiny amount of flavourless, glowing paint. And as we will see, the consequences were devastating. It's a reminder that what we put into our bodies matters more than we think, which is why I'm excited to share today's sponsor, Rhea Essentials. If you haven't heard of Rhea Essentials, they are a brand focused on clean, science-backed supplements that support your body where it counts. We hear a lot about metabolism these days, but it's not just about calories and cardio. It's also influenced by inflammation, oxidative stress, and gut health. When these systems are off, it can disrupt insulin levels, leave you feeling sluggish, and make it harder for your body to burn fat and regulate weight effectively. This is where Rhea's colostrum supplement comes in. With ingredients like lactoferrin, immunoglobulins, and growth factors, it targets these root causes, calming inflammation, strengthening the gut lining, and protecting your cells from oxidative stress. This means better nutrient absorption, more balanced cortisol levels, and a metabolism that actually works with you. So, make sure to try it out by using my link below and use promo code LIVES15 to get 15% off your Rare Essentials colostrum. Now back to the video. Some young women inquired if the paint could hurt them in any way. Managers replied saying it wasn't dangerous and that they didn't need to be afraid, assuring them that the only side effect of consuming small amounts of the paint was rosy cheeks. At the time, many people believed that small amounts of radium was actually good for you. It was even marketed as a medical elixir for treating all types of illnesses. For fun, many girls painted their dresses, fingernails, and even teeth with the glow-in-the-dark paint, so they could shine at night and stand out from the crowd. The youngsters loved the luminosity that the paint gave off. Eventually, many of the workers even started to glow in the dark. This was a terrible sign, but they had no idea. These poor workers were later known as the Ghost Girls. Despite the scientific community and US Radium knowing the dangers of this substance, they did nothing regarding the misinformation and the conditions that their workers faced in the studio. This was because radium companies sponsored research that suggested the positive effects of small amounts of radium, leading papers to state that it would add years to our lives. While scientists at US Radium did take the necessary precautions when working with the paint, such as using lead screens, tongs, and wearing lead aprons, the girls were completely neglected and left to the effects of radium poisoning. After years working at the factory, things seemed pretty normal. But then, in 1922, Molly Maggia, one of Grace's colleagues, had to leave her job because she was ill, but she had no idea what was wrong with her. Initially, she had toothache, and then various of her teeth started to fall out. Soon after, she felt agonizing pains, leaving her unable to walk. Despite this, doctors claimed that she had nothing wrong with her. Following this, she lost all her teeth along with her jawbone, which the dentist simply lifted out of her mouth. Molly's body was being destroyed by radium poisoning, and by September 1922, just 8 months after her initial toothache, she died. Molly was the first of the dial painters to pass away, but her case wasn't unique. Shortly after her death, Grace, like many other of the dial painters, was suffering from serious bone-related problems, particularly in the jaw. It wasn't long until other dial painters passed away, and in quick succession. These mysterious deaths led to a downturn in business for US Radium. Afraid of this, they created a disinformation campaign and concealed the cause of these mysterious illnesses and deaths. Furthermore, they cooperated with doctors so that the cause of death would be blamed on syphilis. This undermined the women's reputations and allowed US Radium to deny any type of responsibility. Hoping to disprove any link between the dial painting profession and the mysterious illnesses, in 1924, they commissioned the Harvard physiology professor Cecil Drinker to study the working conditions in the factory. Drinker's findings were the exact opposite of what they expected. He confirmed rumoured links between radium and the woman's mysterious deaths. The company's president was outraged and again tried to hide these findings. To try and keep US Radium's name untarnished, he then went on to finance new studies which reported no link between the dial painting profession and the mysterious deaths. In 1925, Grace's health problems began to worsen. Her jaw was becoming increasingly weaker. She found herself in more pain, and her spine was crushed, leading to her having to wear a steel back brace. Her doctor believed there was a possibility that these serious health issues may have had something to do with her former employment. Grace was a highly intelligent girl, and after seeing what had happened to many of her colleagues, she explored the potential link. She then consulted a specialist named Frederick Flynn to examine her health problems. Despite all the clear signs and what she had been told by her doctor, Flynn stated that her condition had nothing to do with her previous job. Yet, there was good reason for this. Flynn wasn't a specialist. He wasn't even a doctor. He was a toxicologist working for US Radium. That same year, US Radium's first male employee died of unknown causes, just like many of the Radium girls. At last, experts finally took charge and investigated just what was going on. The original report from Drinker had been silenced and was limited to the knowledge of the scientific community. Because of this, the Radium girls had trouble disproving the widespread belief that small quantities of radium was safe. Then, a doctor called Harrison Martland proved once and for all that these strange illnesses and deaths were indeed caused by radium poisoning. Through testing, he discovered the serious irreversible damage caused by radium when it was inside a person. This was because ingested radium was constantly emitting radiation. This in turn created holes inside the bones, destroying workers from the inside. Martland soon realized that the poisoning was fatal. The ghost girls, who found themselves glowing at night, now knew their death was certain. Grace Fryer then became the driving force behind the lawsuit against US Radium. In spite of the serious health risks now being more well known, all over the states, dial painters were still being employed. Grace believed she didn't have long left, but she had a good reason for the lawsuit. She said, "It is not for myself I care. I am thinking more of the hundreds of girls to whom this may serve as an example." The problem was that the radium industry was powerful, and they even tried to discredit Martland's clear discovery. Because of this, for 2 years, many lawyers turned down the case. Despite these setbacks, her persistence and intelligence eventually came to the attention of a young attorney called Raymond Berry, who was willing to take on the case. He filed the suit against US Radium, representing Grace and 4 other dial painters, demanding $250,000 each in damages. A legal battle ensued. Grace and her colleagues were making national headlines, and soon after, they were in the center of an international courtroom scandal. The women's health was rapidly going downhill, and the slow-moving court system didn't help. Finally, in January 1928, they made their first court appearance. By now, Grace had lost all her teeth, couldn't walk, and used a back brace to sit up. Yet, reporters still described her as pretty. The other Radium girls were in similar conditions, or worse. Well, 2 were bedbound. The following hearing was in April, but all of the Radium girls were too sick to attend. The judge then proceeded to adjourn the case until September, owing to many witnesses being in Europe on vacation. This decision was met with huge backlash, with one newspaper editor saying it was a damnable travesty of justice. This outrage helped the Radium girls, as the hearing was rescheduled for early June. However, time was running out. US Radium were playing the waiting game and tried to drag out legal proceedings. Furthermore, some of the women had been given just 4 months to live. Days before the hearing, Berry secured an out-of-court settlement. Desperate, the Radium girls reluctantly accepted. Well, they had little choice and not long left to live. Each woman received $10,000 and had all of their medical and legal expenses paid. Despite the sum being considerably less than they had hoped to obtain, Grace had accomplished her main objective. Just as she had planned, she brought attention to radium poisoning and the exploitation within the radium industry. On the 27th of October 1933, Grace Fryer died in her hometown in New Jersey at the age of 34. Despite the efforts of the New Jersey Radium girls having ended in what could be seen as a loss, it went on to provoke huge effects on the radium industry and labor rights nationwide. The New Jersey Radium girls inspired others. One dial painter who read their story in the paper was a woman called Catherine Wolfe Donahue from Illinois. After seeing what had been accomplished, she started her own legal battle in the mid-1930s against the Illinois firm Radium Dial. Just like US Radium, they denied responsibility, lied, and attempted to cover up any link between their employment and radium-related deaths. They even went as far as interfering with autopsies in order to hide the truth. In spite of Catherine looking for justice due to her terrible health problems caused by conditions at Radium Dial, she was shunned for suing one of the few companies still standing during the Great Depression. In 1938, her case finally went to court, and thanks to her giving evidence from her deathbed, she won the case. This victory wasn't just for herself, but for exploited workers nationwide. Catherine died soon after, on the 27th of July, 1938, at the age of 35. These cases led to life-saving regulations, and finally, companies had to take responsibility for the safety of their employees. Thanks to the courage, determination, and sacrifice of Grace Fryer, Catherine Donahue, and the other Radium girls, industrial safety standards in the US were significantly tightened, and this definitely saved countless others from a similar fate. To this day, the ghost girls are still glowing in their coffins, due to the radium embedded in their bones. Now, we are heading to England to look into the Society twins who were taken too soon. Lady Jacqueline Mary Alva Montagu and Lady Alice Eleanor Louisa Montagu were both born on the 27th of November 1879. They were the second and third children of George Montagu, Viscount Mandeville, and Consuelo Montagu, née Isnaga. The twins had an older brother, William, who would later become the 9th Duke of Manchester. The twin sisters were born into one of the most senior aristocratic families in Victorian Britain. Their father, George, was the son of the 7th Duke of Manchester, and would eventually succeed as the 8th Duke himself in 1890, when his daughters were just 10 years old. Their mother also hailed from a very notable family. Her father was Don Antonio Modesto Isnaga, a businessman who came from a line of rich Cubans who had run sugar plantations on the island for generations. Yet, they switched their business and political interests to the United States as the Spanish Empire in the Americas collapsed in the first half of the 19th century. Consuelo subsequently became one of the earliest examples of what are typically termed the dollar princesses or dollar heiresses, the daughters of wealthy American businessmen who were married off to the sons of leading British noble families. The American families secured ties to British nobles, raising their social status, while the British aristocrats secured a large injection of cash at a time when many dukes, earls and lords were struggling under debts which had been accumulated by living the high life for years. Thus, Jacqueline Mary and Alice Eleanor, or May and Nell as their family called them, were born out of a marriage of convenience between a Cuban-American mother and a British aristocratic father. As we will see, this marriage, which was just a social and financial transaction, would negatively affect May and Nell as they grew up. May and Nell's early lives were somewhat chaotic for children of the aristocracy in Victorian Britain. Early on, they lived between the Montagu family's English properties, spending time variously in London and at Kimbolton Castle in Cambridgeshire. This country house was the Montagu family seat, and a castle which had a rich history, dating back as far as the 16th century, when Queen Catherine of Aragon had spent her last years here after her divorce from King Henry VIII. Their lives were uprooted, however, when they were just 4 years of age, when their grandfather, the 7th Duke of Manchester, exiled his son and his family to Ireland. Here they lived on the estate of Tandragee Castle located in County Armagh in the south of Ulster. This was owing to their father's reckless lifestyle in London, where his drinking, gambling and other activities saw him quickly squander the vast majority of the $6 million dowry that Consuelo had brought to the marriage. To put his spending into perspective, this money which he spent in just a few years is equivalent to over $170 million today. One wonders what the two girls must have felt, living in a country where families like the Montagus were seen as alien overlords who had supplanted the Roman Catholic Irish population, and where they would have become increasingly aware of the fraught relationship between their mother and father, whose marriage was far from happy. The twin sisters' situation changed again in 1890 as their grandfather's death led to the family's full return to England, and their parents taking up the position of Duke and Duchess of Manchester at Kimbolton. Their relationship with their parents would have been a strangely distant one. The Duke and Duchess spent growing amounts of time split between Kimbolton and London, with their mother engaging in many charitable activities, and May and Nell increasingly minded by nurses, tutors and other household staff. It was during this period that it became clear that Nell was ill, with what was termed consumption at the time, but which we know as tuberculosis today. Known in the late 19th century as the White Death, it had become one of the most lethal diseases in the Western world at the time, having slowly emerged from the 17th century onwards to replace smallpox as the cancer of its time. The disease is a respiratory one and primarily impacts on the lungs initially, before the breakdown of the respiratory system leads to muscle and body wastage, thus the name consumption, as though the body is being consumed slowly. By the time it became clear that Nell was suffering from it, nearly 25% of all premature deaths in countries like Britain were occurring owing to tuberculosis. This infectious disease is caused by a bacteria and spreads from one person to the next through the air when people who have active tuberculosis in their lungs cough, spit, speak or sneeze. It is generally believed that May was suffering from tuberculosis as well, so she may have caught it from her sister, though she would never be officially diagnosed with it. Nell and May might have experienced symptoms such as a chronic cough with blood-containing mucus, fever, night sweats, and weight loss. Tuberculosis can also infect other organs, and this can cause a variety of symptoms. The twins celebrated their 15th birthday in November 1894. By then they were, to quote a near contemporary, Sir Shane Leslie, the two most beautiful and delicate girls imaginable. Sadly, they would not celebrate their 16th birthday together. On the 15th of March 1895, May died. She had not been officially confirmed as being consumptive, and so the cause of her death remains unconfirmed, though it is assumed that it was tuberculosis. Some accounts give her reason for passing as malaria, though this is not at all clear. If there was a reason why May was suspected as having died from malaria, it is because the family were on holiday in Italy at the time. Though it's hard to conceive of today, in an age prior to air flight, when people rarely left the climatic environment where they lived, it was somewhat common for people from Northern Europe to fall ill with malaria if travelling to the Mediterranean. So, it is not impossible that May died from this, though tuberculosis remains the more likely cause of death. May's death unfortunately caused something of a rift between her mother and one of her oldest friends, Alva Smith Vanderbilt. At the time of May's death, Alva's husband William Vanderbilt was in the Mediterranean with the Montagus and arranged for May's body to be brought back home to England on his yacht. When Alva learned of this, she suspected that her husband and best friend were having an affair. So, the incident added to Consuelo's tragedy at the time. Although it was clear by then that Nell was suffering from tuberculosis, She continued to live a relatively normal life after May's death and funeral. In the winter of 1898, she made her society debut both in London and in the US, just before her 19th birthday. Following her appearance at events in New York that November, the newspapers referred to her as the most admired of the belles of the past London season, and as exquisitely pretty. Yet, Nell's entry into high society and her enjoyment of the normal life of a young woman would be all too brief. After her sojourn in New York and the US, she and her mother headed for St. Moritz in Switzerland, a town which had been famous for its healing spring waters for centuries. They were here by the end of 1898, and Nell would spend much of the remainder of her life there. Reports of the time juxtaposed her unfortunate ill health with her great beauty, noting her shimmering golden brown hair and general joy for life. Unfortunately, her health was deteriorating sharply by this time. Over the spring and summer months, her mother employed numerous physicians to attend on her. All recommended rest, and that she should remain in a dry climate and not to return to the damper conditions of England. Things, though, did not improve. By the start of 1900, it was clear that she was dying. In the months before her death, family and friends went to visit her at the Alpine retreats where she'd been living to pay their last respects. Nell died on the 10th of January 1900, aged just 20. Her passing was widely reported on, with the New York Times in America and publications such as the Times in London carrying the story the day after. As far away as New Zealand, her life and death was soon being reported on. A relevant passage from the Otago Daily Times gives an indication of the depth of sorrow at her passing, particularly as it came quite soon after the demise of her twin sister. Numbers of people who never in their lives saw the late Lady Alice Montagu felt a check of regret and sadness in reaching the unexpected news of her somewhat sudden death at Davos Platz. For one had grown so familiar with her beautiful face, through often seeing her photograph or her picture in illustrated journals, that she always seemed a sort of personal friend. Lady Alice was indeed one of the loveliest girls London has seen for many a long day, and had not only the charm of the traditional beauté du diable, for she was only in her 21st year, but also that of special sweetness of expression and amiability of nature. It seems so sad to think of her already cold in her grave, just when her life was only in its early spring. As the daughter of one Duchess, Consuelo Duchess of Manchester, and the granddaughter of another, the Duchess of Devonshire, each family having extensive ramifications, the death of Lady Alice will throw many noble houses into mourning. The cause of death was consumption, that scourge of the English race, which carried off her twin sister, Lady Jacqueline. Nell's funeral was held at St. James's Palace on the 15th of January. The service was attended by some of the leading nobles of late Victorian Britain, including members of the royal household and staff. Afterwards, Nell's remains were taken to Kimbolton Castle, where she was laid to rest next to her twin sister. In the aftermath of Nell's death, their mother decided to create a timeless memorial of their all too short lives. She employed Louis Comfort Tiffany to create the memorial. Although the Tiffany Company is more widely known today for its jewellery, the founder of it was actually more celebrated for his work in stained glass. At St. Andrew's Church, located on the grounds of Kimbolton Castle, the Duchess had him install a stained glass window showing the two girls from an image of them shortly before May's death, when they were in their early teens. The ethereal image still adorns one of the main windows of St. Andrew's Church, a testament to the two girls who died so young. Had the girls been born just 15 or 20 years later, it is possible that they would not have died. Already in the 1890s, new methods of pasteurizing milk and other substances that the tuberculosis bacterium was regularly transmitted through were emerging. Then the first successful immunization against the disease was achieved in 1906, just 6 years after Nell's death. By the 1920s, vaccines were generally available, though the turning point against the disease did not come until after the Second World War. Today, roughly 25% of the world population continue to carry a trace of the bacterium, but it is almost entirely dormant and doesn't negatively impact on people. Next, let us head back to a small town in Sweden during the 1860s, where something truly bizarre would occur. Karolina Olsson was born on the 29th of October 1861 on the island of Ökno in southern Sweden. This island lies off the coast of Montagu, a locality in the province of Kalmar in southern Sweden. The island is small, and the only major settlement there is a town also called Ökno. The remote location on a remote island would only add to the mystery surrounding Olsson's life story in the years that followed. Little is known about Karolina's early life, and Ökno was certainly not the kind of place which generated much by way of scandal or sensation in the mid-19th century. The Olsson family were typical of the island. Karolina's father was a fisherman, the industry which the community was based around, while her mother was a housewife. She was the second eldest of 5 children in a family which just about managed to subsist in the circumstances of a poor fishing community. Her 4 siblings were all boys. The world would never have heard of Karolina Olsson had it not been for the events of the 18th of February 1876. That day, 14-year-old Karolina hit her head while out on the ice of a late winter freeze on Ökno. She developed a toothache immediately afterwards. Isolated rural communities like Ökno were still prone to extreme superstitions in the second half of the 19th century, and Karolina's family began to believe that a hex or some malign spell had been placed on her by a local witch when the toothache did not subside. And then, on the 22nd of February, 4 days after her fall, Karolina went to bed and by all accounts did not wake up for 32 years. The Olsson family were, quite unsurprisingly, not sure how to deal with this latest twist of fate. For a small, isolated community like this in the 19th century, there was no knowledge base to draw on to try and determine what might be happening to poor Karolina, and the family were too poor to afford to pay for a physician or consultant to be brought from the mainland to examine the sleeping teenager. As a result, they fell back on local folk medicine and the advice of the island's midwife. Karolina's mother would force-feed her glasses of sweetened milk and water every day, in the hope that this would wake her from her slumber, or at least keep her alive until she awoke. Eventually, the community at Ökno banded together to try and collect money to hire a doctor to come to Ökno and assess the situation. However, his medical expertise brought no relief. The physician determined that Karolina was in a coma, and despite using smelling salts and even jabbing her with needles to try and force a reaction, he couldn't wake her. The best he could do was give the Olssons a bottle of tonic, which he advised them to give her daily to keep her body ticking along while she slept. He then left, though he continued to visit weekly thereafter to observe the situation. As he did, the situation changed slightly. Occasionally, Karolina was said to sit up in bed and begin mumbling prayers in a kind of half stupor, while other reports assert that she would sometimes sleepwalk. However, Karolina was never known to reach full consciousness, even if she began moving about. Realizing that he had no answers for Karolina's condition himself, the first doctor who visited soon began writing letters to newspapers all around Sweden and leading medical journals in hope that some doctor in Stockholm or elsewhere, one with greater training than himself, would read about Karolina's case and possibly have an answer as to what was happening to the girl who was increasingly becoming known as Soverskampa Ökno, or the Sleeper of Ökno. Soon these stories drew more doctors who arrived to Ökno, hoping to solve the case and awaken the teenager. But they had little success. No one could wake her. There were multiple theories as to what was happening abounded. Some believed she was in some sort of peculiar hibernation. Others claimed Karolina was suffering from a strange psychological disorder, though the field of psychology was in its infancy in the late 19th century, and few had any hypotheses as to what it might be. Others suggested she was comatose, or in a state of profound shock about something, while more still proposed that she was actually acting, and that the entire thing was an elaborate hoax being perpetrated by both Karolina and her family. Other unusual features of her case were also noted. For instance, despite her endless slumber, Karolina's hair and nails never seemed to grow and did not need to be cut, while she also continued to seemingly awaken periodically, only to keep her eyes closed and mumble some prayers before returning to bed. Soon the years began to pass, and still Karolina remained asleep. As they did, the methods of trying to wake her became more extreme. In 1892, when she was 30, by which point she had been asleep for 16 years, Karolina was taken to Askarsham, a large town on the mainland with its own hospital. Here she was treated using electroconvulsive shock therapy, but when this too failed to garner any result, doctors effectively gave up. She was returned to Okno, and there would be no further attempt to solve her situation. Well, all the solutions available in the late 19th century had been exhausted. In 1904, 28 years into her hibernation, Karolina's mother dropped dead, no doubt exhausted from years of caring for her comatose, slumbering daughter. Some stories have it that Karolina woke enough to begin weeping when her mother died, but this may well be an embellishment. In any event, some female neighbours began to aid in Karolina's care and watched over her, while her father and some of her brothers were out on the fishing boats of Okno. It is a pity that her mother died in 1904, for had she survived a few more years, she would have lived long enough to see her daughter escape her perpetual nightmare. On the 3rd of April 1908, at the age of 47, just over 32 years after she first went to sleep, Karolina Olsen suddenly awoke to the astonishment of her father, 2 brothers and neighbours. When she awoke, Karolina was informed that her mother was dead, as were 2 of her brothers, who had both drowned out at sea over the years. As her situation revealed itself to her, and as she looked in the mirror, in which she barely recognised herself, Karolina began to weep. Given what had happened over the years, her case now generated massive attention in Sweden and internationally, as it was reported from Stockholm to London and Paris that the sleeper of Okno, whom people might have remembered from the newspapers 30 years earlier, had finally arisen. For her part, Karolina agreed to undergo a psychiatric evaluation and medical testing in Stockholm. During these, her mental faculties were determined to be entirely intact, while she had not noticed the transition of 32 years, and was effectively waking as though she was still a 14-year-old girl rather than 47 years of age. The physicians at the time noted that she looked extremely youthful for her age, appearing to be no older than 25. But there was no consensus reached as to what had actually happened to her, or the explanation behind her bizarre 32-year sleep. So what might explain Karolina Olsen's malady? All of the medical explanations which were theorized at the time, whether it was hysteria, dementia, a coma, or some psychological disorder, have been dismissed since. However, one possible explanation is that she was suffering from a very severe case of Kleine-Levin syndrome. Kleine-Levin syndrome is a very rare disorder which is generally characterized by bouts of excessive sleep, or what is called hypersomnolence. Normally, this manifests as a person sleeping for upwards of 20 hours per day, but in some instances, it can see a person sleeping for days on end. When they wake, the sufferer may exhibit irrationality, lethargy, or even seem extremely disoriented, conditions which might explain the supposed bouts of waking which Karolina experienced, and during which it was claimed she began praying or sleepwalking. The exact cause of the syndrome is not entirely clear even today, and the condition was undiagnosed in the late 19th and early 20th centuries while Karolina Olsen was sleeping at Ocknell. Hereditary factors may contribute to the appearance of it, with some individuals simply having a genetic disposition to developing the syndrome. It may also be owing to a brain malfunction of the hypothalamus, the part of the brain which regulates sleep, appetite, and body temperature. The disorder can be very cyclical and sporadic. For instance, someone who suffers from it can go through weeks or months where they are very badly affected, and then it becomes as though they never had the syndrome at all. Moreover, the symptoms are often brought on by a severe incident, like banging one's head, as Karolina did on the 18th of February 1876, while they also tend to alleviate the appearance of aging, such as occurred in 1908 when Karolina Olsen awoke and looked over 20 years younger than she was in reality. Another typical aspect of the Kleiner-Levin syndrome includes an excessive appetite when one wakes, although these were not present at all in Karolina's case. However, if there is an explanation for the sleeper of Ocknell's case, then Kleiner-Levin syndrome may be it. There is also a possibility that the entire episode was a highly elaborate hoax. In 1910, Karolina met with a psychiatrist called Dr. Freudenstrom. After assessing her condition, he published a paper on her condition in 1912, in which he stated that it was an unclear case of hibernation, but there was evidence that Olsen did periodically wake up and would express sorrow and anger. It is unclear if this was a reference to her periodic sleepwalking and mumbled prayers, but Freudenstrom speculated that Olsen was a severe hypochondriac who believed following her accident in 1876 that she was seriously ill, and that thereafter she remained still with her eyes closed to elicit sympathy. Those who have argued that it was a ruse or hoax of some kind along these lines note that her mother possibly helped her in her deception, and after she died, one of her brothers took over this role. Then, when this carer died in 1907, she abandoned the fabrication altogether shortly thereafter. As with the theory that she was suffering from Kleiner-Levin syndrome, the idea that her 32-year hibernation was simply an elaborate hoax also remained unproven, though it seems difficult to believe that she could have deceived the doctors who administered the electroshock therapy to her in 1892. Following the initial flurry of medical tests, Karolina attempted to return to Ocknell and live with her father and two remaining brothers. However, the case of the sleeper of Ocknell generated such interest that their little cottage on the sleepy Swedish island was inundated with so many visitors and newspapermen that they left their home and settled elsewhere for a time. Eventually, many months later, they returned to their island. Karolina lived out a long life here. She died on the 5th of April 1950 at the age of 88, occasionally being visited by people who were interested in seeing the famed sleeper of Ocknell in the flesh. Her case remains unsolved to this day. For our final tale, we are going far back in time to the Tuscan countryside. Bia de' Medici was born sometime in 1536 near the city of Florence in Italy. Her father was Cosimo I de' Medici, but the identity of her mother is unknown. Aside from Cosimo, only his mother, Maria Salviati, knew the identity of Bia's mother, but she never revealed it and took the secret to her grave. Some believe she may have been a peasant who worked for the family at their home, Via del Trebio, though it's more widely believed that she was an unnamed Florentine noblewoman. To better understand her story, we must first look at the powerful family she came from. The Medici originated in the Magella region in Tuscany and rose through trade before founding the Medici Bank, the largest in Europe during the 15th century. This wealth paved the way for their political dominance in Florence under Cosimo de' Medici and his grandson, Lorenzo the Magnificent. Yet, they remained citizens in name, and it wasn't until 1532 that the family secured the hereditary title of Duke of Florence, marking their transformation into true rulers. As a member of a junior branch of the Medici family, Bia's father Cosimo had grown up in the Tuscan countryside, destined for a respectable but likely quiet life away from the political spotlight. Yet, everything was about to change. On the 6th of January 1537, Alessandro de' Medici, Duke of Florence, was assassinated by Lorenzino de' Medici, a man who was both his cousin and friend. Alessandro, just 26 years old, had no legitimate heirs, and so at just 17, Cosimo, previously a political outsider, was unexpectedly named the new Duke of Florence. Many of Florence's most powerful men had thrown their support behind young Cosimo, convinced he would be easy to manipulate. But they had gravely underestimated him. Behind his reserved demeanour was a fierce resolve. With calculated precision, Cosimo seized control, outmanoeuvring rivals and tightening his grip on power. In the shadowed corridors of the Palazzo Vecchio, he began to reshape the future of Florence, laying down the foundation for what would one day become the mighty Grand Duchy of Tuscany. Yet, as he forged his empire, the young duke's private life came to light. By the time Cosimo seized power, his mysterious daughter Bia was nearing her first birthday. Far from hiding her, Cosimo claimed her as his own and brought her into the fold of the Medici household. She was initially raised in Florence within the protective walls of the Medici palace, with trusted nurses caring for her. As a young duke, Cosimo now turned his gaze towards marriage, not for love, but for power and to secure his line. The Medici name still carried the scent of merchant wealth and recent nobility, and Cosimo knew he needed a wife whose bloodline could anchor his authority in Europe's aristocratic circles. His eyes fell upon Eleonora di Toledo, the beautiful daughter of the Spanish Viceroy of Naples. Their union was one of pure strategy, sealed by a lavish dowry and the quiet promise of Spanish backing. They were married by proxy on the 29th of March 1539, and within months, Eleonora arrived in Florence to meet her young husband, and with him, his cherished 2-year-old daughter Bia. With Eleonora's arrival, Florence glittered with renewed grandeur. Barely 18, the Spanish noblewoman stepped into her role as Duchess with confidence. But court whispers soon turned toward her relationship with Cosimo's daughter. Some claimed Eleonora resented the presence of Bia, a child who had already captivated her husband's heart. Perhaps it was jealousy, who could say? Yet others remembered a gentler truth, that Eleonora treated Bia with kindness, even affection. And indeed, most historians lean toward this version of the story, that the Duchess, far from cold, welcomed the little young girl into her new household with grace. But her time here wouldn't last. Whatever the truth of her place in Eleonora's affections, one thing is certain. Bia was sent to live at the Villa di Castello, her family's estate nestled in the hills just beyond Florence. There, far from the formalities of court life, Bia spent her days under the watchful, experienced eye of her grandmother, Maria Salviati. Some might see her being sent away as cruel, but Bia wasn't alone here. At Castello, she shared both her home and bedroom with Giulia de' Medici, the illegitimate daughter of the slain Duke Alessandro. As Bia grew up, she and Giulia became inseparable, more like sisters than distant cousins. Just 2 years older, she was both her companion and protector, and together they brought a spark of life to the old estate. Bia soon earned a reputation as a radiant and spirited child, charming, lively, and just mischievous enough to keep her nurses on edge. Her playful nature and quick wit won over everyone, but none more so than her father. Cosimo, now burdened by the weight of ruling a city, would slip away from court just to visit her, finding in Bia tender joy that no money or power could replace. But with the pregnancy of his wife, one question lingered. Would his love for Bia endure? Or would his legitimate heirs now get all the attention? By now, Cosimo and Eleonora were firmly installed at the ducal court and had turned their attention to producing legitimate heirs who would one day inherit their titles and lands. In 1540, Eleonora gave birth to the couple's first child, Maria, and the following year, Cosimo was thrilled when a healthy son and heir, Francesco, the future Grand Duke of Tuscany, was born. Many would have now expected Bia, born outside of wedlock, to fade into the background and have a different upbringing, but this wasn't the case. When Maria and Francesco were old enough, they too were sent to Villa di Castello under the care of their grandmother and a circle of devoted nurses. It was there, far from the politics of Palazzo Vecchio, that Cosimo's children were raised together, in a world of order, education and affection, with occasional visits from their parents, who were busy ruling Florence. To elevate the Medici to the ranks of Europe's great ruling houses, Cosimo spared no effort in shaping his children's futures, and that included Bia. By the age of 4, she likely began her formal education, with mornings devoted to religious instruction and afternoons filled with lessons in manners, embroidery, and music. She would have also begun to learn the basics of Tuscan, and even her playtime was carefully structured, overseen by nurses and tutors who planned to mould her into the image of a refined Florentine girl. In later years, her younger siblings would follow a similar path, their every step overseen by Cosimo and Eleonora, right down to their clothes and tutors. But for Bia, all the care, the teaching, the promise would come to nothing. One day in the late winter of 1542, Cosimo planned a trip to the Tuscan town of Arezzo and decided to bring his beloved Bia along. It was a rare chance for father and daughter to enjoy precious moments together, away from courtly demands. During those days they were inseparable, but as they made their way home that February, fate turned cruel. Soon after returning to Villa di Castello, both Bia and Giulia were struck by a sudden high fever. Cosimo made sure he sent the best doctors to attend to them, but the widespread epidemics, underdeveloped medicine, and poor hygiene meant the odds were against them. Still, Giulia slowly recovered, but Bia's condition only got worse. Cosimo was frantic, sending orders for constant updates as his cherished daughter slipped further from reach. From February 25th to the 28th, her decline was swift and heartbreaking. A court official wrote grimly, "Tomorrow will be a much sadder day." On March 1st, 1542, Bia passed away, likely from malaria. She was just 6 years old. Her death was deeply mourned by Giulia, her grandmother, and especially her father. Bia was laid to rest with honour in the Medici family crypt at San Lorenzo. Forever among the dynasty, she had briefly brightened. 6 months after Bia's death, a new light entered Cosimo's life. His daughter Isabella was born. Though many expected him to hope for a second son, those who knew him best understood the depth of his sorrow. Historian Paolo Giovio captured the sentiment in a tender letter. "I congratulate you on the beautiful baby girl God has conceded to you, in recompense for the one he has taken to join him in paradise." Isabella would soon become Cosimo's new favourite, and his marriage to Eleonora remained strong and affectionate. They were blessed with 9 more children, though many, like Bia, would also meet tragically short fates. Still, the shadow of Bia's brief life never fully left them. After her death, it's widely believed that Cosimo, stricken with grief, had a plaster death mask made of Bia, and then commissioned a posthumous portrait from the brilliant court painter Agnolo Bronzino. The result is a hauntingly tender image, a young girl adorned in white and pearls, radiant and serene, captured not in life, but in memory. Many consider it one of Bronzino's greatest works. As the poet Tulia d'Aragona once described the portrait, it enshrines a grace that entices, absorbs, and captivates whoever experiences it. Today, the portrait of Pia hangs in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, where her luminous presence continues to captivate those who stand before her. The delicate medallion bearing Cosimo's profile worn by the girl in the portrait helped confirm the subject's identity as his daughter and emphasize their bond. Originally, the painting hung in the Medici family chambers, serving as both a tender reminder of their lost child and as a spiritual symbol, guiding them in reflection and the hope of salvation. For centuries, the painting was mistakenly thought to depict Maria de' Medici, Bia's legitimate younger sister. This confusion led some to assume Bia was simply a nickname for Maria. In reality, it was most likely a diminutive of her given name Bianca, which means white in Italian, though some have also speculated it might come from bambina, meaning little girl. The truth wasn't discovered until 1893, when art historian Cosimo Conti uncovered archival evidence confirming the existence of a separate daughter, Bia, born to Cosimo before his marriage, and so the portrait's true subject was finally restored to her rightful name. Another portrait, this one by Jacopo da Pontormo, depicts Maria Salviati seated with a young child in her lap. For years, scholars debated the child's identity. Was it Bia, Giulia de' Medici, or someone else? Those who argued for Bia pointed to the child's features, noting they did not resemble the known portrait of the adult Giulia, and questioned whether Maria Salviati's relationship with Giulia was intimate enough to inspire such a tender image. However, after much scholarly debate and closer examination of historical context, the consensus today favours Giulia as the subject. Each year, the Uffizi Gallery in Florence attracts over 3 million visitors annually, and most likely pass by Bia's portrait without ever learning her story. Thank you so much everyone for watching this video, and thank you for making it to the end. Again, a big thanks to Ria Essentials for sponsoring this video. Make sure to get your Ria Essentials colostrum by using my link and promo code LIVES15 for 15% off. If you have any suggestions, leave me a comment down below, and if you want more videos like this, also let me know. I hope you guys are subscribed and have notifications turned on to get all my videos as soon as I upload them. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.